All right, good afternoon to you. I'm Fox 26 meteorologist Ramisha Shade. Let's talk about the tropics. Things are definitely heating up. In case you haven't noticed, we are now into the month of August. And historically, typically, August and September are the busiest, most active periods of our hurricane season. And the forecast certainly calling for a lot of that Saharan dust to clear out there across the Atlantic, Caribbean, and Gulf. With water temperatures super warm, it's likely only a matter of time before we start to see more named systems, tropical depressions, tropical storms, and yes, even hurricanes. So let's get right to it. Things are already starting to heat up across the southwestern Atlantic. Before we get to what's happening out there, I want to show you the Saharan dust tracker. And really over the last few days across Houston, that dust plume has been pretty thick. In fact, really impacting our air quality yesterday. Today, we still have some hazy skies out there, and that will likely continue through Friday. But overall, as we get into the weekend and even into next week, a lot of that dust will start to clear out from the Houston area. And notice out across the Atlantic, there are more pockets where we don't have a lot of that dust, and some of that really thick dust starting to clear as well for parts of the Caribbean and the Gulf. So usually that Saharan dust, which travels a long distance all the way from the African coast, usually it brings in drier air. So it kind of helps to hinder any tropical development. But of course, once it starts to clear out, kind of disperse, become less dense, that gives us an opportunity for more tropical development. And that's exactly what we could have as we go into this weekend and early next week. We've been monitoring a tropical wave, a tropical disturbance in the southwestern Atlantic, and it is getting more organized. It's this area of showers and storms here. You can see that big flare up, that bright orange, those showers and storms popping up right over some of those Caribbean islands. We've got parts of Haiti being impacted. We've got parts of Cuba being impacted. And of course, we've got parts of Hispaniola getting some impacts as well. So we will certainly continue with the potential for heavy rainfall here and gusty wind. But this now has a name. This is now Invest 97L. What is an Invest, you may ask? Well, it's basically the term the National Hurricane Center gives to a potential tropical system that they want to investigate further. So usually when a system is given the name of an Invest, that means that the National Hurricane Center will start to send out their Hurricane Hunter aircraft into the system to start to see if it is developing that center of circulation, that area of low pressure, and then they start to look to see if it becomes more well-defined and turns into a tropical system. That's what we don't want, but that's exactly what could happen. So let's put this into motion. You can see it kind of rotating counterclockwise there. It is getting closer and closer to Cuba. Like I said, rolling over some of those Caribbean islands, dumping some heavy rain, but just not extremely organized right now. It is in some slightly drier air at this point, but as it pushes closer to Cuba and especially closer to the U.S., likely into the eastern Gulf of Mexico, it is going to move into an environment with a little bit more moisture, more of a favorable atmosphere for tropical development. And of course, the water temps are super warm out there, well into the 80s. So there will certainly be enough fuel for this system to possibly blow up into a hurricane as early as this weekend. Yikes. And it could be in the Gulf of Mexico. So I know if you're in Houston, you're probably on edge, like not again. We were already hit on July 8th. We don't need another system. But of course, right now, it looks like it is going to stay in the eastern Gulf instead of head towards the Houston area. But notice this area here, the shading of orange switching over to red. That basically means the chance for development for this system has gone from medium to high. So we now have a 70% chance that we could have maybe tropical storm or Hurricane Debbie by this weekend or early next week. I want to show you the water temps out there across the Gulf of Mexico. Super warm water, some buoys showing up close to 90 degrees out across the Gulf of Mexico. We are expecting the system to roll into the eastern Gulf of Mexico by this weekend, and look at all of this warm water that it is going to have to work with, kind of like bath water out there. So there will certainly be enough of that warm water to help this system to rapidly strengthen. And with that Saharan dust kind of becoming less thick, less dense, there will be an atmosphere more favorable for tropical development. So what does our exclusive Fox model show us? Well, let's put it into motion. Things are quiet across the Gulf of Mexico now, but of course we've got this system churning over the Caribbean islands. And by Saturday morning, I'm going to stop the clock here around 8 a.m., our exclusive Fox model futurecast showing this storm getting a bit more organized and rolling right over Cuba. However, I think over the next couple of days, it's going to be kind of difficult for this to really flare up and strengthen quickly because it's going to be moving and interacting with land, some of those Caribbean islands. But as it pushes into the eastern Gulf of Mexico, likely by Sunday morning around 8 a.m., just off of the southwestern coast of Florida, it is going to be in that very warm water, no longer interacting with land, and there will be environmental conditions that are more favorable, or atmospheric conditions that are more favorable for development for this tropical system. So I think by Sunday, it's really going to start to get its act together as it pushes into the eastern Gulf of Mexico and starts to roll to the north. Now, let's keep going. Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening into Monday morning, notice that this system is looking a lot more impressive, a lot more organized, and it's actually showing an eye. So that likely means a hurricane on our hands by Monday morning. And this particular model, our exclusive Fox model, showing this potential hurricane, this would be Hurricane Debbie, rolling right into the Big Bend of Florida. So of course, that's that bend in between the Florida Panhandle and the Florida Peninsula. So some areas that could be impacted would be Tallahassee, Florida, Gainesville, Florida. This would likely stay just to the north of Tampa, but it likely pushes right across the Florida Peninsula, and it's going to roll likely right over Jacksonville, Florida. So what does this mean? A ton of wind, a lot of heavy rain, and yes, the potential for storm surge, some pretty big impacts. You can see it here. Well-defined eye right there between Tallahassee and Gainesville and getting close to Jacksonville. And that is by 5 p.m. Monday evening. Even if you had travel plans or if you have family down around the Tampa area, you may not get a direct hit, but some of those outer rain bands will likely be impacting the Tampa, Florida area. So it is certainly going to be something to watch closely. Now that's one of our computer models. Let's switch over to our GFS model. This is another long range model that we have to look at to kind of see what the forecast is showing. What is this system going to do? Well, our GFS model shows something fairly similar. Not really super organized through the weekend. Saturday morning, likely rolling over central western portions of Cuba, but not extremely organized. But as it stops interacting with all of that land and pushes into the eastern Gulf of Mexico by Sunday, notice it is getting more organized. Now, our GFS model is a little bit different from our exclusive Fox model because it actually takes it into that Florida Gulf Coast a little bit sooner. Really on Sunday, it is getting close to the Tampa area, so it keeps it a little bit farther south and brings it in, making that landfall a little bit quicker. So I think by Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, our GFS model has this making that landfall just to the north of Spring Hill, north of Tampa, likely rolling over Gainesville after landfall, and then eventually Jacksonville as we get into Monday morning. So definitely something to watch. The GFS has it a little bit farther south, making landfall a little bit quicker, but in a similar area. And of course, our exclusive Fox model had it a little bit farther north, but still hitting Florida, a direct hit likely for Sunday and Monday. So this is something we're going to have to watch closely. Notice by Monday evening, our GFS showing this rolling past Jacksonville and pushing up into portions of the Georgia and Carolina coast. So even though this likely will not be rolling towards the Houston area, we will still have to watch it closely. You may have a trip planned to Florida. You may have family and friends in Florida. You may have a cruise that was leaving from Florida that could get some delays. So certainly keep checking back because this could end up being a fairly impactful hurricane, and it likely will develop pretty quickly as we get into the second half of the weekend. All right, here are some things to consider. Right now, it's not that organized. It doesn't have a name. It's just a tropical wave. It's not even a tropical depression yet. And I think over the next 48 hours or so, it's going to be very hard for this system to kind of get going and really strengthen quickly because, like I said, it's going to be interacting with some of those Caribbean islands. Right now over Hispaniola, it's going to be rolling over parts of Cuba, parts of the Bahamas. So when a tropical system or a potential tropical system interacts with land, it kind of loses that steam or that fuel needed to strengthen, and that fuel is that warm water. So once we get this thing out over the open water, likely by Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening, and into the eastern Gulf by Sunday, that is when we expect this system to become much stronger. It's going to be in a more favorable environment for strengthening, and we could start to see a named storm, which would be Debbie, and possibly a hurricane on our hands by late Sunday and Monday. So we'll have to watch this closely, but notice the cone of uncertainty. It has shifted west a little bit, but it is not in the Houston area, but it does include a huge chunk of Florida. And if you have travel plans, or if you are going to be in Georgia or the Carolinas early next week, you certainly need to keep a close eye on this one as well. All right, let's talk about our storm names so far for the 2024 season. We've been through Alberto. Who could forget Beryl if you are in the Houston area? A lot of you are still cleaning up from all of the mess that Beryl left. Fences down, rooftops damaged, large trees blown down onto houses, cars, trees uprooted. A lot of power lines have been blown down, and there's just a lot to clean up from, and some of that cleanup is still going on. So hopefully nothing for the Houston area anytime soon. Of course, we briefly had Chris, but that next system that I've been talking about would have the name of Debbie, and we could have tropical storm or Hurricane Debbie pretty quickly, especially by Sunday into Monday. Once we get into the rest of August, September, we could actually get through a lot of additional names. Forecast still calling for a pretty active season, so it is something that we are going to have to monitor closely. But for now, I do think there is a high likelihood that we will have either tropical storm or Hurricane Debbie by the end of the weekend. All right, we are officially into the month of August now, and like I said, this is usually the time where the tropics start to heat up across the Atlantic basin, which of course consists of the Atlantic Ocean, the Caribbean Sea, and the Gulf of Mexico. So these are some of the hot zones, if you will, that we look to kind of see where we could have the best shot for tropical development. And notice that pink purplish area down around the central Atlantic over towards the Lesser Antilles and Greater Antilles. That's a pretty high chance for tropical cyclone formation, and that's exactly where we have that potential disturbance right now. So we will continue to watch that area closely. Also, just off of the east coast of the U.S., that is a more likely region for development in the month of August. Also, the Gulf of Mexico, chances for development not quite as high, but we are in that likely area. Not the most likely region, but it is definitely an area to watch closely for the month of August. And of course, the month of September can get even more active. In fact, typically, historically, September 10th, the peak of hurricane season. Even early October, things could still be a little messy out there with a lot of action. And then as we get towards November, of course, things usually start to calm down and quiet down. But we've still got a ways to go for our hurricane season this year. We've got all of August, September, October, November, so 4 more months. And keep in mind, just because we've been hit once by Hurricane Beryl already does not mean we can't get hit again. So you need to make sure you have your insurance papers ready to go. Make sure they're protected if a system were to come here so that they would stay safe during the storm. Make sure you know what to do to protect your home. Make sure you have the things to protect yourself and your loved ones. Know your evacuation routes. Just make sure you're always ready to go, because you never know when these things could take another last-minute turn. But for now, I think we are safe in the Houston area. I don't think it is going to be heading our way.